Good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN, and I am so excited to welcome you to a great conversation tonight between Sophie Brickman and Joy Hurd. Thanks for coming. FAN is a nonprofit organization that presents a high-quality speaker series offered free to the public on a wide variety of topics, including human development, mental health, education, and social justice, to name a few. We have over 150 videos of past events archived on our website and on our YouTube channel, so please be sure to explore. And now for introductions of our special guests. Sophie Brickman is a writer, reporter, and editor who has written for The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, Elle, and the San Francisco Chronicle, and other outlets. Her work has also appeared in the Best Food Writing and the Best American Science Writing anthologies. Her first book, Baby Unplugged, was released in September, brand new book. Joy Hurd is the head of Lake Forest Country Day School in Lake Forest, Illinois. Before moving to Illinois, Mr. Hurd served as director of the upper school at the Buckley School, a K-9 school for boys in Manhattan. He has also taught at St. Peter's Prep in New Jersey, St. Bernard's School, I keep saying Bernard's, he'll correct me in just a minute, and Riverdale Country School. He'll be returning to St. whoever it is, Bernard, in the fall of 2022 as their new head of school. We'll miss him. But you know, it's Zoom, so we can still welcome him. Mr. Hurd is a graduate of Harvard College, where he studied the classics and where he met Sophie Brickman. And now, with no further ado, Joy and Sophie.
Thank you, Lonnie. Thank you for that kind introduction. Thank you for your work on this. And we so value our partnership with FAN, and it's a real pleasure to be part of this event tonight. Sophie, good evening. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing? It's great to be here.
I'm doing well. It's a real pleasure to be here with you as well. And I want to start by congratulating you on the book. It is brand new and has been well received, and with good reason. I'm looking forward to our conversation. I think you and I have a lot in common. We're both millennial parents of young children, and I think we're navigating a lot of the issues that you touch on in your book. And with Baby Unplugged, in my view, you've written a very insightful, very thoughtful, very well-researched, and also very funny book. I think you come at this with in my view, a sense of humility and curiosity about how to navigate the world today, so infused with technology, but also wanting to be the best parent you can be. And that resonates with me, and I know that it will resonate with many people who are part of the Zoom call this evening. So congrats, and really looking forward to just talking it through with you a bit.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. When people say congratulations, I don't know what they mean, because my third kid was born 11 and a half weeks ago. So I'm sort of like in the thick of all of this at the same time. But well, thank you so much.
Congratulations on that too. That's excellent. That's excellent. So starting off, I just want to, some people on the call might have read the book. Some might just be curious about the book. Tell us what led you to write it.
My husband directly. So he and I met the last week of college, and he ran off into the Silicon Valley world and loved technology, always has, and like really believes it's this great disruptor and has a wonderful potential to change the world and make it better. And we lived down in San Francisco for a while, and I sort of like looked the other way when he would strap gadgets onto his body that monitored like all sorts of things, and he would crunch numbers about like literally everything he could about his own body. And I didn't really care. And then my daughter was born. She's now 5, my oldest. But she came back from the hospital like day 3 of her life, and he strapped this smart monitor onto her. I think it was monitoring her heart rate or her oxygen level or like something pretty intense, but I didn't know from newborns. And I was like, great, like let's monitor it. Let's make sure that everybody, sleeps through the night. And the alarm went off in the middle of the night, and I thought something horrible had happened. But we were living in a 5th story crappy walk up, and the Wi-Fi had given out. And so in that moment, I was like, oh God, I've been sort of thoughtless about tech in my own life. And now we have this like pristine, perfect little person. Let me sort of get to the bottom of this. So I started, trying to get real answers for myself. I wrote a short piece for the New York Times about sort of like our nursery that had all this technology in it because of my husband, and got a real response from parents who were like, oh God, I'm also in the thick of this and I don't really know what to think. And there are a lot of conflicting headlines and what's the real answer? And so I thought, okay, like I've struck a nerve, there's something here. And so I spent, a couple of years reporting, and I researched, I talked to developmental psychologists and neurologists and VCs and entrepreneurs, and I tried to get a kind of a cohesive answer about real questions I think a lot of us have. So that, I guess I wrote it to prove my husband wrong a little bit about this technology.
Yes, and knowing Dave as well, I enjoy sort of envisioning those early days of parenting, and I can reflect on my own in the not too distant past. So you hit on a couple of ideas that I want to invite you to expand on a little bit. One is this idea of disruption, which is a term that we are used to, I think, in the business world, the world of tech startups, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes when you hear disruption, you hear terms like hacking and optimizing and all these things that are meant to change our practices, maybe change society for the better. And so it does seem that a lot of what you investigate in your book is whether these attempts to disrupt, hack, optimize parenting are good or bad. How did your research lead you to learn more about how companies are seeking to hack, disrupt, optimize parenting, and maybe even childhood?
Yeah, I mean, the book I ended up splitting up into two sections. The first section, focuses on tech that is targeted towards parents. So that has a lot to do with data crunching and like number crunching. Also has to do with the ability to take photos of our kids, which we can do at the click of a button. And then the second half focuses on tech that's targeted at the children themselves. So like smart toys and screens and iPads, like television programming and books. And so there is this very sexy terminology to disruption and to hacking and sort of to simplifying your life. And I think that's sort of the promise of tech, is that it can simplify your life if you utilize it the right way. What I found is that as a parent, the simplification sort of, in order to get to the simplification, there was a lot of more. There was more gathering of data. There was more crunching of numbers. And, I took my son actually to his 3-month doctor's appointment today. And he got his head measured, his circumference measured, his length and his weight. And I was like sitting there with the doctor and I was like, his toes, like he never relaxes his toes. And my doctor was like, well, you know what that means, right? And I was like, what? He was like, absolutely nothing. I was like, right. And so he's actually a character in the book. He's a wonderful guy, but like what you need to monitor in terms of actual data crunching for kids is those 3 metrics for all but, the outsized cases of kids. So in terms of like disrupting using technology to, somehow spit your child out at a more efficient child and like sleeping through the night better and stuff, like it doesn't really work like that. And I think as you go through it as a parent, you realize that you need that friction, like having friction in your life and having friction with your kid, like helps you know your kid better and helps you know yourself as a parent. And like, absolutely, there's technology that can help you along the way. But I think the question I started grappling with was like, what does it mean about society, our society writ large, that we are trying to hack parenting and make it simpler? Like, is that the point? Or is the point that my kid is having, throwing her pacifier out of the crib for the 5th night in a row or whatever, and I'm like scooting around on the floor trying to find it, and it's 4 a.m. Do I want her to be doing, like, do I want to be doing that? No. Is it bringing us sort of closer together? A little bit. And then there was actually a company where I spoke to the CEO, and I wrote about this in the book, that crunches data specifically about sleep, which I think that almost any parent of a young kid would be like, yes, that is what I just want to turn them off at the end of the night and have them sleep for 12 hours. And then they'll wake up at the end of it and they'll be great. And I'll be able to have my glass of wine and go about my evening. And he specifically was like, we can crunch numbers where we can say, if you go and you pick up the pacifier, you will prolong the kid staying awake by 15 minutes. But if you let him cry, he'll go to bed within 4 minutes. Don't you want to know that information? Maybe, but maybe it's just too much information. So I think in terms of disrupting parenting like that, you have to sort of sit and think why you're really trying to disrupt it and what you're doing. And if you're sort of using a Band-Aid to a moment that you should really, as a parent, be sitting there and sort of working through. And it's hard, but it's hard. Parenting's hard.
Turns out, yeah, it is, and very rewarding, but difficult. You mentioned that a lot of this seems to be in search of making parenting simpler, and I think that is part of it. As I think about your book, though, and I think about my own thinking on these issues. It seems to me that a lot of it is trying to do parenting perfectly and using this measurement of your child in various ways as a way of almost spotting the suboptimal elements of how you're doing so that you can address them. And I think about that when you mentioned your husband and now how he is doing wearable tech and measuring himself. Like, we are in this societal moment maybe where we're measuring things so that we can figure out what to optimize. Does that gel with your research as well a little bit?
Yes, I think it's part and parcel of sort of the anxiety that the modern parent feels, which, frankly, parents have felt for generations and generations, but seems to be particularly acute right now for a number of reasons, which is like every single moment needs to be the best moment. Be that, my kid can't sit there and be bored.
Right.
I went out and I interviewed like the top developmental psychologists in the field. Every single one of them was like, boredom is great. Like, let your kid be bored. Like, that is when they get creative. That's when they get imaginative. That's when they can learn to like soothe themselves and do all these things that you can quash by giving them technology, or you can quash by getting down on the floor with them and giving them a toy that yaps at them. But what is that really in service of? And if you want, everybody said, if you want like resilient, smart kids that you want to hang out with, like, let them play, read to them an enormous amount, and hang out with them and talk to them. I don't think this idea of enrichment is exactly, it's been sort of convoluted. Like, kids enrich themselves if you give them the space to do it, I think.
Yeah, well put. I completely agree. And this conversation so far reminds me also of one of the authors that you mentioned in your book, Alison Gopnik, and she wrote a book, The Gardener and the Carpenter, right? Which maybe you could probably explain it better than I can. But one of the distinctions she draws is the difference between parenting as an active verb that maybe doesn't, that almost seems at odds with boredom, to your point, versus being a parent, which kind of brings the idea of maybe boredom is part of that equation because it's a state of being rather than an active verb.
Absolutely. And I mean, and parenting as a verb is a very new verb. It's something that I don't know when it first came into the iteration, but I don't think that our parents parented. We parent. They were just parents. But Alison Gopnik, like she is a very, very wonderful and lauded, developmental psychologist, and she deals with evolutionary biology and sort of long grade timeline. So I went to her office in Berkeley and I was like, is everything going to be okay? And she was like, yeah, like this is just like one little blip in a very long history of people freaking out about their kids. But her book, The Gardener and the Carpenter, is a very, very soothing book, or it was for me. And she makes this differentiation between, as gardeners, you kind of make sure the soil and the environment is great for your plants and you let them flourish. As a carpenter, you take wood and you cut it and you shave away and you do all these things to it and you have your perfect, artifact at the end of it. And she said, there are very few things that you can do as a parent that will actively change the outcome of your kid's life in terms of, for example, where the kid is sleeping, if they're swaddled a certain number of days or not, if you are monitoring XYZ thing, if you are giving them this toy versus that toy. She said, her quote, I believe, is something along the lines of, parenting is a mug's game. She's like, it's not, you're not gonna win this thing. So the thing that's best for kids is to act more like a gardener, like give them the environment and let them flourish in it. Don't try to create the kid that you want, because actually it's a fruitless goal, and it's not enjoyable. I mean, like, it's not as enjoyable as a parent, I think, which is part of it. It's like, I think this is part of it, and I write a little bit about this in the book. It takes the joy out of a lot of this stuff when you start obsessing over numbers, when you start obsessing if your kid is in the right developmental stage. Like, kids by and large hit their own developmental stage. That's what they do. Like, kids grow up. And yes, there are things to look out for, but by and large, your pediatrician is doing that for you. So when you put, this thing in people's hands and they can monitor so much, it's very hard to look away. But I don't think it's not necessarily the best thing for you, and it's definitely not the best thing for your kid.
Right, and everything you're saying now and relates to something you mentioned a while back, which is just this parental anxiety that exists. And it's funny sitting here with you now, because it was about a year ago that I did my first fan interview. I was interviewing David Epstein, the author of Range. And at that time, my daughter, she was 8 months old, I guess. And she was still sort of army crawling. And I remember talking to David Epstein thinking, like, I know she's maybe is supposed to be crawling. She's not. We're a little, we're wondering. And, here we are today. She runs. It's great. She's working on jumping. Like, everything's fine, to your point. But I know the anxiety. And so much of what we do, I think, is fueled by that sense of anxiety and wondering whether we're on track. And I think you could probably zoom out and look at society at large fostering that same kind of anxiety. But there's one line in your book that was related specifically to buying things for your child, e-commerce. And the line is this, and it's very familiar. If I buy the right thing, my kid will be the right kind of kid, and I'll be the right kind of mom. This is you speaking, of course. And so that really resonates. And tell us a little bit about that, maybe that segment of the book, the e-commerce, and not only that, but how trying to provide every opportunity and everything maybe is fed by a certain kind of anxiety.
I mean, I think that, ever since there were marketers and they really took off like in the 1920s, like we have been parents of young kids have been like fish in a barrel for them, because we are, we're anxious. We're taking care of the most important thing that in the world that we didn't, know existed before. And we're tired and we want to do our best. Like, we don't want to screw this up. And so I think like it's just sort of taken up to an 11 when you get to modern e-commerce, where you're bombarded all day with, your kid needs this toy to be smarter. Your kid should be watching this type of television to be, more on track. To your point about Eleanor, about your daughter, there are companies out there that send you toys every few months.
Yeah.
Some of them are fantastic. But a lot of them are predicated on this notion that there are developmental stages. And so it's like at this stage, they can pull tissues out of a thing. And at this stage, they can roll a ball. And at that stage, they can, do a different thing with a knobbly ball. And so they send you these things. And some of them are really beautiful and they're very thoughtful, a lot of them. But the implication is that there are developmental stages that your kid needs to be hitting. And if they're not hitting them directly when they turn 5 months, then you get anxious. And I spoke to a woman who used to run an organization called RIE, which stands for Resources in Infant Educators. And it's a parenting philosophy that sort of got sexy because a bunch of Hollywood celebrities kind of ascribed to it. And it can be a little bit like fringy, but one part of it that I really liked was their philosophy about toys. And, she said, she was like, you give a baby one toy, they will play with it in different ways as they get older. Like, you don't need to be giving them a different toy at each birthday or each month or whatever the case may be. So, she said they're very big into like kitchen appliances, right? So it's like, give your kids some bowls or they like hair rollers too. Cause like you can put your tongue through a hair roller, or it can be like a weird ice cream cone thing, or they want the kids to basically create, their own imagination around the toy. This is getting a little bit far afield, but the point is that these types of e-commerce companies that keep popping up in my Facebook feed and in my inbox, they tell you, they attune you to this idea that your kid needs to be being enriched at every moment. Whereas in fact, as I said before, the kid will enrich itself. Like there's a common trope. You get the kid an amazing toy and then all they want to do is play with a cardboard box and turn that into a spaceship. Developmentally, if that's what you want, if you want your kid to excel developmentally, give them the cardboard box. Like, that's what they should be playing with to exercise their brain and their gross motor skills and their fine motor skills, all these things that you want for young kids, not the toy that does everything for it and makes them smarter.
Right. The cardboard box thing, it was amazing how quickly that came true in my own house, knowing that was a bit of a trope, but so true. So let's talk a little bit more about toys then. I think you're hitting on something really, really important about creativity and how kids interact with things. I'm thinking also about here at Lake Forest Country Day School, we have this outdoor classroom. And so it's sort of my backyard. I walk through it every day, and the kids are just outside playing with stuff. I walked by and our students were being encouraged by their teachers to figure out how many uses for sticks they could come up with. And it was just a great thing to see, especially for 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds. And I just think we sometimes overthink what qualifies as a toy. And so you did a lot of research into toys, and I think a lot of people, there's a lot of conversation about screen time, and you delve into that a lot in your book as well. But I think what's great, among many things about your book, is that you think about toys more broadly in a way that you just touched on a little bit. But let's shift away from the toys that you sort of mentioned. Screen time. What did you learn about screen time? This is the question, I think, of our time when it comes to parenting. Is screen time okay? Is it bad? How bad is it? What did you find?
So it is definitely, it's sort of like the I don't know, it's like the flashpoint. It's like the flash word for all of us millennial parents. And it's like there's an enormous amount of judgment, and there's a lot of, like how often did your kid watch Frozen, and like, is that okay? And like my kid watched Frozen like 9 million times during the pandemic. Like, what was I going to do? We just watched it a lot. There were like a couple real hard takeaways that came out of my research. I think it's important to note, like I split up the section on screen time into programming for kids and like that you would watch, like Sesame Street, and iPad. And iPad apps, like the jury's kind of still out because the iPad hasn't been out for that long. So in terms of like rigorous longitudinal studies that developmental psychologists and researchers really need, like they haven't been done yet, but the research is pointing in one direction. And I sort of was like, I can't wait another 8 years. Like my kid is 4 now and wants to play the iPad. So I did my best to kind of get as much information about that as possible. Something that I learned that came up in every chapter that I reported about kid technology, including about toys, is this phrase called serve and return interactions. And it's sort of like the bread and butter of development for young kids. And it basically boils down to having a conversation with your kid, but that can be sort of broad, like Jules, my 12-week-old, like is just starting to smile. Like when I look at him and he smiles and it's the best thing in the world, that's a serve and return response. And like I have to really be doing that with him. I can't be doing it and then also looking at my phone, because like the minute I look at my phone, he's like, and he can't focus on it. And I think that's sort of taken, up as you get older. And so if you can talk to your kid in whatever way that means, which is like you drop in when they're watching something on TV and you're like, oh, Elsa's turning that into ice. Like, is it, I don't know, what can we do with ice? If you can talk about what it is that they're doing on the screen or with the toy or with their book, anything that you can use as a tool, as a jumping off point for that, the better that it is. And so I sort of realized I had come at it wondering like, which program should we watch and which app should we watch? And it became less what is on the screen and sort of how you're using the screen. And so, there is research that seems very compelling to me that kids basically under the age of 5 can't really translate what's going on a 2D screen to a 3D world when it comes to like moving things around on a screen. So, Ella's preschool teacher told me about one of her students who couldn't sort shapes, which is a very sort of basic thing that kids do in preschool. She couldn't put all the circles over there, the red things over there, or whatever. And she spoke to her dad, and the dad said like, oh, this is so odd because she does a shape sorting app on my phone every day. And so that's like a very simple way. It's like kids can't learn that thing on the screen and translate it to the world. Often it's very hard for them to do that. But what I realized is if I could find something to watch with Ella, it was more enjoyable for both of us, and it was better for her developmentally, because then we could sort of talk about it. 2 days ago, it was raining. We just finished reading Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and we watched the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, like the Gene Wilder movie from the 70s. And it was fantastic. And it was like a lovely morning that we spent watching a movie and talking about it and singing songs. It's not bad. It's not all bad at all. I would also say, you can sort of cut me off or direct me, but another sort of way to evaluate programs that are on screens is how quickly they move, and like how many cuts there are. So, Mr. Rogers is touted as like one of the best shows ever for kids to learn from, because he like partially he moves incredibly slowly. Like you watch him and you're like, put your cardigan on like a little bit faster. Like it's like 0.5x speed the whole time. But kids can really like, it's quiet, it's slow, it's one camera, they're not a million cuts. If you look at stuff that's out there today, it's very frenetic and it makes kids very jangled. It's very hard for them to transition from that into the real world. So I would say like those two things, if you're trying to evaluate what they're watching, like try to watch with them if you can, or at least be able to like see what's going on, and then try to pick kind of quiet and calm things for them.
That's great advice. And I'm laughing because of the 0.5x comment on Mr. Rogers. As we were talking earlier about this age of optimization, I'm thinking about all the people that I know, and I've tried it myself, of listening to podcasts on 1.5x or 2x speed, because I want to, get as much knowledge as I can in my finite amount of time. And it's interesting to think about how the entertainment or the enrichment that our kids are exposed to in some regards is also at that faster pace. I think maybe for different reasons, but it makes sense that the habits that we're building for ourselves lead to the experiences that our kids have, right?
Absolutely. And I think, this conversation kind of go in two different ways, which is like our own tech usage and how we, how kids mimic us, or also like the one thing that you can't really speed do is read. I spoke to like, you can't speed read Goodnight Moon to a kid. Like you can't do it. And I think that's like, one of the takeaways that I had from the chapter that I wrote about ebooks, which their promise is that they could like, improve upon an analog book, is a pediatrician I spoke to who was like, it's one of the only unhurried times during our day is you sit down and you read to a kid, and you can't speed read to a kid or else they just won't pay attention. And it's incredibly important to do that. And so, that's why books, I think, just trump all of this tech. Like you really can't improve upon a print book when it comes to young kids learning.
And I love hearing that. Again, like I also enjoy reading physical books myself. So it's great to know that reading physical books, there's research that shows it's good for kids. Are there any elements of book reading versus screen reading that you want to share with the audience we have this evening?
Sure. I think like, the American Academy of Pediatrics, which I referred to an enormous amount of times, and I interviewed a bunch of people that are high up there who, wrote the screen time guidelines and stuff like that. They say to start reading to your kid from birth. So like I took Ella home from the hospital and she's like a little burrito in her swaddle, like propped up on the bed. And I was like, I'm going to read to you and this is going to be great. And it's like, you kind of feel like a jerk, but what they're trying to show you is like that moment. It's not just about the book. It's about being with mom or dad, or like sitting in somebody's lap who loves you and doing something together and having a shared experience. And then when the kid gets older, like that's why they're board books. Like it's an oral fixation, and that's fine. That's like a way for them to engage in the book. That's okay. I think, there's a lot of studies about, how many words kids hear and how that translates to future success. But when you translate that, there are some people I spoke to who said, it doesn't matter what you're reading on. You can read on an iPad and you get the same thing. You're in daddy's lap, you get all that love. Sure. But like, how many times are you on an iPad and something doesn't like zing in, and there's like some news alert, or there's a weather thing, and there's a something. So like it's built to be a little bit more distracting, for one. And then all of the enhancements that ebooks purport to give young kids, and this changes when the kids are older and they're learning how to read on their own, and like, that happens at 5 or 6 and stuff. Like there can be benefits to that. I don't think it will ever trump sitting and reading with a person and helping you read, but when they're really young, like their brain is not neurally designed to be able to read. It's an incredibly hard thing to do, to string sentences together. And I went sort of nerdily deep into the neurobiology. It was all very fascinating, but like you don't want to distract when you're reading, and technology, if you're reading on a screen, there's often very many distractions. If it's just on like a Kindle and it's exactly the same, sure, it's like sort of splitting hairs. But I do think there's something tactile and enjoyable, and like the book is a shared object, and the iPad is often a personal object. It's like the relationship that comes between the viewer and the iPad. the book, it's like you open it up and it's immediately inclusive of anybody who can see it. I think that's a really key moment. And yeah, I think that's a key thing to recognize when it comes to reading books.
And I love that. And I love the fact that towards the end of your book, so I'll back up. There's an element of your book. You go out exploring to see what is the research, what is the reality, how should we think about the role of technology in our parenting and our child's development. But there's this element of coming full circle where your book kind of ends with reflecting on the beauty and the simplicity of having your child on your lap and reading a book to them almost the old-fashioned way. And I can't help but think about it in this time that we're in terms of education, where, if you rewind pre-pandemic, there was promise of disruption that technology would do for education, optimization for education, hacking education. The MOOC was supposed to upend higher ed 10 years ago, and that didn't really pan out. And then we go through this terrible time of this pandemic, and all of a sudden, I think we're reminded we've come full circle as a society in some regard, where the idea of being in person for school and having that connection, not between parent and child, but between teacher and student, it's almost like that sacredness has been regained. And so I love that element of your book with the child on the lap reading a book, because there's something sacred about that. And maybe we don't want technology to disrupt certain things. And so I saw that connection between parenting and teaching that I'd welcome your thoughts on if you see any parallels there.
Absolutely. I mean, I will say, so like I submitted the manuscript to the book about a week before Andrew Cuomo shut down New York for lockdown for the pandemic, and I spent the first few months spinning out like everybody else, but in the back of my head I was like, oh my God, am I going to have to re-report everything? Is technology really going to be the savior here? Is it going to come in and is it going to educate kids better and help them socialize better and all of these things? Like, this is really like putting my research to the test. And relatively quickly I calmed down, because most, if not all, of my takeaways remain as valid pre-pandemic as they do after. And to your point, even more so. I think that people are, we've sort of come face to face with our reliance on technology. Like, people, I don't know how many people are here, but I'm thrilled that lots of people are here, because people have Zoom fatigue. It's like, you don't want to sit on a screen anymore. You want to see somebody in person. And I think, when it comes to young kids and both just how they learn best and what is best for them, it's very much so, social and reading facial expressions and being in the room. Also for young mothers, there was sort of a chapter I wrote about social media and sort of where the virtual village fits into all of this stuff. And I spoke to a pediatrician, or sorry, not a pediatrician, somebody who runs a group healthcare organization for pregnant women. And she said, like, when you're pregnant and when you've had your baby, or when you're in the early stages of parenting, for any parent of any gender, it's very important to like get a hug and to have that look in the eye, and like, and you sit down with a glass of wine and really like commiserate over stuff. So I think in terms of the benefit of in-person interactions, it's like, you can't trump that. But it's great that we can do this Zoom. There are use cases for it for sure. But I don't think that any more people are thinking, this is better than, or this is like a fantastic replacement. And I saw that firsthand with my daughter's preschool when they tried, valiantly to do Zoom preschool, because nobody knew what they were doing in the first few weeks. And we only had, another 2 months to go of school. And it's like, getting a bunch of 4-year-olds to sit on Zoom is a nightmare. And it's kind of hilarious. And it's also very dystopian. And, Ella like couldn't figure out where people were. And there were like all these little boxes when everybody brought their stuffed animal. And you're like, oh my God, like, this is not what they should be doing. It's so clear, and I think it's different for older kids, but I don't really know any preschool parent who enjoyed the Zoom part of school.
Sure. I'm glad you mentioned the fact that we're, the benefits of technology, the fact that we're all able to do this, for example, because what I don't think your book does, and what I don't want this conversation to do, is be this Antitech Luddite, conversation, because I don't think that's the goal at all. And in fact, one of my favorite moments in your book is when you're talking about screen time and you just stop and say, my daughter and I have probably watched the Muppets Mana song 1 million times. Why? Because it's really funny. Not because it's enriching. And that's one of the moments where your book where I was reminded of how balanced your book was. It's truly an act of curiosity, not sort of a dogmatic approach to these things. So, I mean, if you could offer some thoughts on how technology has enriched your parenting or optimized, hacked parenting. How is your family life, appreciably improved by technology, lest we seem like we're just anti-tech?
Right. I mean, like first to your first point, and I'm glad that really did come across, because the part of the reason I wrote the book is I really found myself in between two camps when as a parent. And one camp was like, you never show your kid a screen or they're going to turn into a sociopath and you live off the grid. And the other one was like, let's crunch all this data and plug them into the wall and they'll be fantastic people in 18 years and they'll be enriched and fabulous and like rule the world. And I have to be in the middle. Like I use my phone all the time. Screens are all over. I'm like a modern mother. And so I really wanted to figure out a way to use it the right way. So I came up, I found useful, I think, practical takeaways about how to use it. I think, like you brought up the Phenomena skit, it's like you can there's wonderful programming out there. Like not much of it is super modern, but there is some wonderful stuff that is out there that is being put out there now. I think I learned a little bit more to trust my gut and not just go for whatever program was marked educational and like had a stamp of approval. That that stamp is very nebulous depending on where you go. I think, I don't know. I really don't think that, back to the reading thing, this is maybe an unsatisfying answer, but it's a truthful one, is that I asked a doctor, I said, like, what's the best tech out there? That's the question everybody wants to know. Like, okay, so you hated all this, but like, just give me the one thing that's fabulous. I was like, come on, there's gotta be something. And he said, if I went to the top minds in the world and I asked them to come up with, the most enriching, most beneficial, most high-tech, amazing piece of technology to put your kid in front of, what would they come back with? They would come back with a book. And I was like, that's a good baseline. There, like, you can't really improve upon that. And there are, of course, I use, like, if my house would not function without Google Calendar and like knowing now I have 3 kids, it's like NASA to get out of, the house in the morning and pick up and stuff. It's like, yes, of course, there are uses for it. I think, and taking photos and sharing them with my parents, even before the pandemic, it was great. During the pandemic, it was like critical, they wanted to see them. And I have a shared photo screen and there were 900 photos of the kids on it. There is absolutely a use case for that. And, developmentally speaking, FaceTime is given the stamp of approval from the American Academy of Pediatrics from a very, very young age, like way before screens are okay, because there is something about talking back and forth.
Sure.
So we were 8 blocks from my parents, couldn't see them. Like both of us were locked in our apartments. We were on FaceTime like once a day. So yes, there are good things, but I think the idea that tech will reflexively be additive is something that I was disabused of when I finished my reporting. Like it says it will be additive and it will enrich your life and make it better. For me, it made me more anxious. And when I realized that like Ella was more excited doing the laundry with me, like than she was playing with some toy that beeped and squawked, I realized that maybe I had been thinking about it all wrong.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. And it brings me back to your earlier point about the serve and return, right? So if serve and return is sort of a central theme of your book or a central theme of development and parenting, it seems that technology that fosters serve and return interactions is probably good.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe, I don't know if you use this phrase, I use it in my life. Have you heard of the phrase digital pacifier?
No, but I like it. Sure.
So that seems maybe not good. Is digital pacifier?
So digital like there's a wonderful researcher and she's at the Academy of Pediatrics, American Academy of Pediatrics, named Jenny Radesky, and she wrote screen time guidelines. I think the most recent ones, but she was like a rabbi to me during this, and she did a study about like watching people in restaurants. I think like give phones to kids. I think this is what it is. I might be jumbling it, but basically what she told me is she was like, if you give your phone to a kid to stop an outburst, it's a Band-Aid and they will stop. But what you are not doing in that moment is learning who your kid is. Like if your kid gets really irritated when you take the straw wrapper off themselves, then just like let them take the straw wrapper off themselves. I think that there is a use for making your kid quiet. my 5-year-old, for whatever reason, didn't have school today. Again, like there's professional development. So like we got through the 3-day weekend and I was like, oh my God, we have the 4-day weekend. And I had to take her to the 3-month-old appointment. And she was like good for the first 40 minutes. And then when we were waiting, she was like, ugh. And I gave her the phone for a little bit.
Right.
Like, it's okay. I just think you need to know why you're giving it to your kid. And, everything in moderation is another sort of nice little catchphrase that kept coming up when I spoke to people. Like, don't flagellate yourself for giving your kid the phone. Just know why you're doing it and make sure that they're not constantly in front of it, and make sure that it's part of their diet of stuff they're doing. Make sure they're outside a lot. Make sure they're doing free play. Make sure they're pretending. Make sure you're reading. And then
Right.
put them in front of the Muppets. Like, it's okay,
I want to make a little bit of time speaking of phones, to talk about your research on photos. And I really loved your chapter on photos, because it was an example of where your book, I think, starts in the particular on tech, but I think thematically it was actually about memories and how we cherish them, how we treat them. So it sort of zoomed out, and I think a very good way beyond the immediate subject of the book. You make a claim in the book that the goal of family photography forever, even before smartphones, is performing a happy life, and that does resonate with me. I think social media has taken that to a new level. But what was some of the research that you uncovered about the usefulness, the reasoning, the effect on memory of taking photos of almost everything, which I think we know as parents we tend to do?
Yeah. And I mean, I think we all, like, we live in this constant tension of capturing the moment and experiencing the moment. And where, that tension is sort of heightened when you have this device in your pocket where you can capture everything. And when your kid is so cute, and when they're doing all these wonderful things, and like their toenails are adorable, but then also they start to maybe talk. Like, Jules giggled for the first time the other day, and I was like, where's the phone? Where's the phone? And then I was like, wait, just like let him giggle. It's okay. He'll giggle again, and I will capture it and be able to share it with everybody. But what started me off on the search is that I don't even know if I think it's Google Photos, but I use Google and Apple Photos like kind of interchangeably. And they filter out the better shots from the worst shots. And when I started writing this, Charlotte, who's now 2 and a little bit, was just learning how to sit up. And so I like propped her up on the bed, and I took, I'm sure you too, you take like 900 of the same photo, and then you're like, I'm gonna get the perfect one. So I had all of these photos of the same moment, and she was sort of like teetering over, and then she fell down. And so I had a bunch of photos, and the one where she was like it was like a little blurry. I was like, that's a great photo. It's like really this is like the moment in her life when she's figuring this out. And it was funny and humorous, and it was charming. And the one that Google picked was like her sitting upright and looking perfect. And the other one sort of were like faded to the background because of the way that their algorithm works. And I was like, wait a second, like that feels a little bit sinister to me. Like the photo is still on my phone, but they like made it, they like pushed it to the back. And so I started researching and sort of thinking and musing about why it is that made me feel weird, and what the purpose really, what I was trying to do by capturing all these moments. And I went down a deep dive of Daniel Kahneman, who's a famous psychologist who's very, very fascinating. And he, wrote about the experiencing self and the remembering self, I think. And he said that basically the upshot of it is that like your memory does a really good job of filtering out the things that you need to remember for you. And if you're constantly capturing it, you're not really going to be there when your kid takes their first step. And so like, yes, I'm still taking a million photos of Jules's feet, but I think I know that I don't really have to be doing it, and that my brain will kind of do the work for me. I don't have to be so anxious that I'm going to miss it, that I'm going to blink and I'm going to never remember this moment. And that, that chapter also separately got into a whole issue of like privacy and sharing. That took me down a different sort of like rabbit hole of legalities and stuff. But it is something to think about. Like a lot of kids, I'm going to get this stat wrong. I have to reread my own book, but it's like kids by the age of 5 have X thousands of photos already of themselves shared on the internet. And
Right.
It's like a little bit crazy. Like they can't, they don't consent to those photos.
Right.
It forced me to be a little bit thoughtful about the rules that I was going to implement in my house, when the kids get older.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's been fascinating. It's a funny fact in my household that when on the rare occasion that my daughter gets the phone, she walks around only looking at the back of it. And it's unclear whether that's because that's the side she's used to seeing if she's being photographed, or my wife also has her driver's license in one of those wallet things. So it's also mommy's face. So both theories, I think, have merit. And the fact that she walks around with a phone but doesn't look at the screen, I'm a little bit proud of, but I don't expect it to last too much longer. Uh, question, just sort of a general question of everything that well, I have two questions if we have time still, but one is, what in your research just surprised you the most? As you set out to do the book, what did you just not see coming at all, if anything?
I think for me, it was that boredom was so wonderful for kids, which is a very, very comforting and sort of freeing notion, I think.
Yeah.
Because like I grew up, we had like a 14.4 modem and we were like the cutting edge family. So like I grew up, we had one of those phones in the car that was this big, and my dad was on the cutting edge of technology. And so like I've grown up in a world in which, the promise of more is always better. Like more opinions are better when it comes to social media. If you ask a question about parenting online, you get 36,000 responses about what, stroller to buy. Like that's great. You can crowdsource that. More data crunching is great. More enrichment is really good. Like more, faster, like 1.5x on your podcast or whatever you're listening to. Kids, and to be very clear, like my book focus on preschool kids, and so that's like, from birth to about 5. Like kids need less. They really need like a very slow, calm, analog environment, and they will be more resilient and more successful and stronger in so many ways. And I think calmer and like more fun to be around, frankly, if they are a little bit, calmer and can sort of, one point I want to make, if we have time, like about how to assess technology. Someone else told me, she gave me a very easy way to assess it. She was like, give your kid whatever it is. Give them the toy, the screen, the thing, and then take it away. Like turn off the TV, take the iPad away, take the book away, whatever. See what they do. And she's like, if they have a meltdown or if they panic or if there's something that they can't really transition back into doing whatever you want them to do, it might be an indicator that something's like they can't really handle it. And I feel that way about my own phone. It's like if I can't find it, I'm like, where is it? I don't know what, everything's going to come crashing down. When I take the iPad away from Ella, she like really has trouble. I've never had that with a book. I've never had that with a block. I think it's sort of a way that kids are telling us what they can and cannot handle. So I guess that sort of is not totally off topic of your question. It's just like, that was the most surprising thing, is that boredom is okay. And that if you don't enrich your kid, it can actually be way more beneficial for them than if you actively make sure that whatever they're doing is educational and enriching for them.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. My other question is a little bit, I hope has a fun answer, is of all the products that you learned about, and I'm thinking, when you went to a trade show, what is the strangest baby tech product that you encountered?
Easily, I will tell you. And I don't even know if it's one company, but it's like a new fad was at CES. I went to like the last, consumer electronics show in Vegas before the pandemic.
Right.
And there were multiple booths that had trackers that were in the diaper to tell you when the diaper was wet. I was like, really? Like, you don't, like, there's that blue line, like it's always blue, let's be honest, it's never not blue, but like, do you really need an alert on your phone to be like, please change your baby's diaper? And so like that level of information, it's like what these companies will say is, people want more information, so we're just giving them the opportunity. Like if they want to know when their baby's diaper is wet and get a tweet or like a whatever about it, like great, they wouldn't get a tweet. Sorry, I know more than that, not much more technology, but then that's fine. Like to each their own. But that argument of like to each their own, to me feels pretty sinister, because it's like, we are built evolutionarily to want to gather more data and get more information. So it's very hard for us not to do that. It was not hard for me to not put a sensor in my daughter's diaper, but it was just kind of an extreme version of the type of technology that is out there that really, it's just too much. It's just not necessary. Like we've been parenting for millennia. Like We
Right.
do know how to do this. And like, the subtitle of the book, like at one point was something about trusting my gut, and like we changed that, but it's like, I think most parents know what to do, and there are many reasons that they can't do it, and they're strapped and there are not that many resources, and like, yes, you need to put your kid in front of a TV often, and I get that, but first of all, there's smart ways to do that, and second of all, they bring me back. What were we just talking about? I lost
The
my train of thought, but
No, it's okay. The need for data and the things like that.
right, it's just it's hard for us to look away, and it's not fair, like
Right.
what I said before. It's like, it's not fair to target us parents. We're tired, and we're anxious enough.
We're vulnerable. Yes, that's right. What are one or two action steps for people on this call, people who read your book, who want to, I don't know, do better in this regard as parents? What do we do next?
I think we were gonna at some point talk about mimicking, or like what kids do,
Oh yeah.
and Eleanor doing that thing. I think it's a good anecdote to leave on a nice dystopian image, which is that I spoke to one of the heads of Sesame Street, and like Sesame Street is lauded as being like really thoughtful and very disciplined about what they put in front of kids, which some people disagree with that, but regardless, she's a very, very smart woman, and she was saying, I was speaking to a preschool teacher who said that during free play, when the kids could do whatever they want, they used to like go play doctor and go dress up babies and be mommy and whatever else. She was like, all of her kids sit on the mat and look down at their phones, at pretend phones, and they don't talk to each other. And it's like, it's very extreme. That's not happening all over the place, but kids are born to mimic. And so if you are constantly on your phone, they will want to be on your phone. It's like flashy and sexy and has bright colors. So like, one thing I really try to do is just put my phone in another room during bedtime and bath. And that's like basically 6 to 8, I am without my phone. And it's, Dave does it, and then like suddenly there's like, he came home with a watch, and I was like, that's the same thing. He's like, but it's not my phone. And I was like, it's exactly the same thing, because it's like still pinging and you're still like not really here. But I understand that everybody can't do that, but like just a little bit, if you can carve out a little bit of time where you really are not anywhere near technology, I think it's easier to do that than try to discipline yourself to not pick up the phone when it buzzes, or not look at it when it buzzes.
Right.
Just like
Right.
put it away. And that's what I do. I like plug it in and I put it away, and then I like, then we do dinner and bath time, and it's just like kind of a sacred couple hours that we do every night.
Yeah, there's that word sacred again. I think that's a really good note to end on as we think about these things. Thank you so much. And I see Lonnie, she's back.
I'm back. Great conversation. Sophie, I was curious. So first of all, let me remind people that you can join the after hours to ask Sophie your own questions, and Joy will chime in as well. He knows a thing or two about kids, perhaps slightly older kids once they're in JK and SK, but he knows quite a bit about kids. So come join us, get a copy of Sophie's book, which is fabulous. It's right there, this blue one. It's right behind her as well. And just order it from the bookstore. We've been putting links in, and then come join us in after hours. After hours is going to start at 8:05. We're going to give Sophie and Joy both a 5-minute break in between. So we have a question here from Meredith, my guest. She posted it early on in the evening, and she may probably have figured out your answer, but I'm going to put it in there anyway. Are you familiar with Dr. Gabor Mate and Dr. Gordon Neufeld's book, Hold On to Your Kids? The book highlights that, quote, the essential condition for healthy development is the child's relationship with nurturing adults. If you are stressed or anxious, your child feels this even at the earliest age. And then her question, can digital technology ever be a replacement for nurturing adults?
It's a great question. I can't see into the future. I spoke to, in order to get a very balanced view, I did speak to very, technophilic people and a lot of Silicon Valley people who, told me that the promise of all of this stuff is just it's just around the corner, and there's like wonderful things to come. I believe that there will be something that absolutely, touches on all of these, the worries that I have about technology, about, putting a film between you and your kid and whatever else is. I don't think so. I think it would be hard replace. I hope that I can't be replaced as a mom, I guess. But no, I don't think right now that there really is anything out there. I will say that, to give you an example, another person I spoke to at Sesame Street told me, he was like, the future of AI toys, of artificial intelligence toys, is that you'll have Elmo, and not only will Elmo like speak and laugh when you tickle him or whatever, but Elmo will know your kid, and Elmo will know its birthday and what he likes to eat, and will be able to have conversations with your kid. And we need to make sure that Sesame is at the front end of that, because that, in the wrong hands, that could be really bad. Whether or not you think Sesame is the savior is irrelevant. It's just that idea of like Elmo really knowing your kid, but being a robot is, gives me pause. So I would say I haven't seen anything yet, but let's all hold our breath, I guess, or not.
Roberta has a quick question. Let's see, we're at 7:57. Roberta has a quick question. Plans to have the book translated into other languages? Question mark. How about Brazilian Portuguese? I would love to discuss that with you, with a smiley face.
Great. Talk to my publisher. Let's just put it all over the globe. I would love it.
Let's get there. I'm curious. So one question that came in ahead of time, which is, what would you share with women who are considering motherhood? So they're not yet mothers. What is one thing you would want them to know?
I will give you one piece of advice, which my friend gave me, which was pick a rabbi. Just pick one person, or like maybe two people, and have them be your people. For me, it was my pediatrician and then one of my friends. But when you start, going online and asking everybody their opinion, like, you will get too much information, and it depends what answer you want, but you can find an answer. You can find the answer you want from the internet, depending on where you look. Just find somebody that is smart and knows you, and ask all your questions to that person. That's what I would say.
One question that came up that is my question for you. One of the questions I have for you, I'll ask you more in a few minutes, is there, I'm curious as your friend group of probably fellow moms, et cetera, I'm wondering, in terms of the content of your book, was there anything that's kind of a point of contention between you and your friend group, where it's sort of like, here's the topic that will clear the room, where people just feel so strongly and they're just not aligned on a particular thing regarding your content of your book?
It's a good question. I mean, I do think that I tried my best to be balanced enough so that when I made many of them read it cover to cover, so thank you all of you who did that. But in the process of doing that, I had people who piped in and were like, isn't that oppressive to ask you to wake up at 6 a.m. and just play blocks with your kid? Like, can't we just put them in front of the TV, please? So yes, there were certain things. I would say screen time is very emotional for people our age, and for with young kids. The people feel an enormous amount of guilt about it, and so I think that's often where the flashpoint would come. But my hope is that everybody, I don't come off as being. I hope I don't come off as being holier than thou. Like, I put my kid in front of. Ella watched Oklahoma like a lot during the pandemic, and I came across her singing "I'm Just a Girl Who Can't Say No" like in the bathtub, and I was like, has this gone too far? Have we been showing her the wrong things? But I watch screen time too. I just hope that people now know how to do it better, I guess.
Well, thank you so much. Great conversation. Joy, thank you so much for being yet so prepared and so ready and so engaged. Great listener. You do great pacing with your conversations. Really, really appreciate your service to FAN. Thank you so much for that. Sophie, thank you so much. I know with 3 kids, one of them not barely even 12 weeks old. Thank you so much for taking time away from your family to spend some time with our families. We do appreciate it. Thank you everybody for tuning in. I hope I'm going to see all of your faces at Questlove on Thursday. That's going to be woohoo. Come see him. That's going to be a great night. And we're going to give these nice folks about a 5-minute break. And for those of you joining after hours, we'll see you at about 8:05. So thank you. Any last word from Joy? Sophie, anything else?
Oh, thank you so much.